So Pelion had retreated with the Empire to the Outer Rim and had, like I said, formed, annexed the Pentastar alignment and a couple other territories, merging them together to form the Imperial Remnant. He realized, though, that they needed a victory and they needed to secure their borders. So what Pelion decided is they were going to take a planet of strategic significance, but one that wasn't important enough to get the entire New Republic to throw all of their remaining weight against it. Now, Orinda was an exceptionally wealthy world. It was a world that had been very much developed under the Empire and was kind of one of the crown jewels of the New Order. It had also been where the Imperial Ruling Council had managed the mainstream Empire prior to Palpatine's return. So, Pelion was like, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take Orinda, and we aren't going to go any further than that. So the New Republic won't launch an overwhelming offensive against us because they won't have the political will to do so. So Pelion launched his offensive, and he actually did really good. He won battle after battle. I forget if I mentioned, but he also had Reaper in addition to Megador and Dominion. Reaper had been the flagship of Grand Moff Kane, not Admiral. So he had the Reaper, which had been Kane's flagship, and using the Reaper, he devastated New Republic fleets, etc. But he kept Megador and Dominion in reserve. The New Republic didn't know he had two more Superstar Destroyers, so he was going to hold them in reserve and then bring them out at the last minute. Now, the New Republic had activated the Executor class star Dreadnought Lusancia, which, if we remember way back to Isard's time, they had captured. It had been heavily damaged, but they had brought it back, and they deployed it under the command of Wedge to go and deal with Reaper. Now, what was interesting is after Pelion had taken Orinda, he sent a message to the New Republic saying, look, we retook Orinda, we retook the sector it's in. I promise not to go any further. We needed to retake it because it was the capital, and I think it also stabilized the border. It allowed the Empire to kind of fortify itself. So true to his word, he didn't go any further. He just started kind of fortifying the worlds immediately around Orinda. So the Empire, like I said, sent Wedge. So Pelion, and I think it's interesting, like I said, one of the things that's fascinating about him as a character is despite his advanced age, he was able to learn new tricks. He was able to grow and change. He was able to, under Thrawn's guidance, become a truly great commander who, as we'll talk about later, kind of achieved what his hero never did. I mean, at this point, he's the head of a unified empire, something Thrawn could never boast for. So Pelion kept falling back, winning token victories, but drawing Wedge back towards Orinda. So Wedge and the New Republic fleet, including the fleet carrier Endurance. Now, this whole thing was very controversial because the New Republic didn't want to use battleships or battle cruisers or dreadnoughts anymore. They thought the future was starfighters and carriers. So Wedge jumped in, and the Reaper and Lusancia began trading barrages, but Pelion had decided to spring his trap. A bunch of interdictor cruisers jumped in, started projecting a gravity well, and to the shock of the New Republic, Dominion jumped in on the other side of Lusancia and Endurance, and it began opening fire. So with two Superstar Destroyers pounding them, the Lusancia shields almost immediately went down and the ship began to get ripped apart. Now, it almost got destroyed, but thanks to a Deus Ex Machina, they were able to punch a hole in the interdictor screen somehow and escape. However, Endurance was not so lucky, and it got blown up. The New Republic lost a bunch of other ships. It was a complete debacle. Pelion didn't advance, and the New Republic just decided to call off the campaign. There was no point in going any further. They had lost the war. They had lost kind of irrelevant territory that was pro-Imperial anyways. So, yeah, things just went on pretty well. It had been a resounding success for the Empire. They had proved that they were still a force to be reckoned with. However, the Moffs ordered another offensive a short time later at the Battle of Selenon, and the Reaper got destroyed. So the Empire had once again lost a massive defeat. They had still kind of rebuilt themselves to a certain extent, and they kind of settled into an uneasy truce. Now, after the loss of the Reaper, and there's a lot of conflicting sources about this period because there's not really a book that covers it. You have to look at secondary materials, such as the Essential Guide to Warfare, etc. So some people say that Pelion more or less took absolute power, or not absolute power, but took direct command as head of state following the disaster at Selenon and the destruction of the Reaper. Some people say it came later after the final Imperial push. It's kind of up in the air. But around this time period, he started to become more and more politically involved. Now, there was, let me just read a little bit from the Complete Guide to Warfare. In 17 ABY, the New Republic Senate lifted its ban on former Imperial officials holding elective office. I think this was after something like 6 years of peace following the Orinda Campaign. The move was intended as a peace offering, but the Moths saw it as a prelude to an invasion because they were stupid. So they asked Pelion to launch an offensive, and he's like, no, this is a really bad idea. This idea is stupid. It's crazy. I'm not going to do it. So the Moths were like, no, if you're not going to do it, we're going to get someone who's crazy and stupid enough to launch this offensive. So they contacted Daala, who came out of retirement. So she unified the replacement warlords in the deep core. Keep in mind, Pelion had taken most of their ships, and she launched an offensive out of the deep core. So Pelion was kind of screwed. He's like, what the hell am I going to do? I didn't want this war. I wasn't going to agree to this war. But Daala has started it, so I guess I'm stuck having to fight. So like I said, he really didn't want to handle it, but he figured he might as well give it his best shot, since the New Republic was going to attack regardless. So he launched his offensive from the north of the galaxy, and Daala launched her offensive from the center. So Pelion was actually winning. He beat New Republic fleet after New Republic fleet, and came within a hair's width of the core, maybe even being able to assault Coruscant. However, Daala lost her first battle. Her fleet got destroyed. Pelion had been counting on the New Republic being divided on two fronts. So yeah, it allowed them to concentrate all their firepower. Pelion, in kind of a last-ditch attempt, deployed the Megador and the Dominion, as well as a super advanced Soronan-class Star Destroyer, the Raquel. Just a brief kind of interlude back to the Black Fleet Crisis. I had said after the Black Fleet Crisis, some of Black Sword Command had joined the New Republic, some had disappeared, and some had joined the Imperial Remnant. Pelion had got a whole bunch of ships from that, and things were kind of looking up. Now, his war goal in this whole thing was, it's kind of interesting what they say in the Game of Thrones Revenge, is Pelion says, our goal is not to reclaim a galaxy we've lost, but to strengthen our hand for an eventual peace treaty. I think by the time of the Orinda campaign, which is kind of demonstrated by its limited goals, Pelion realized that they weren't going to be able to ever retake the Empire. The best they could do was retake as much land as possible and sign a peace with honor with the New Republic that wouldn't be a surrender. However, like I said, he deployed his kind of remaining super ships. Then the New Republic, through a Deus Ex Machina, blew up the Raquel, which exploded and severely damaged the two Super Star Destroyers. They were able to jump out, though. They survived. The New Republic's offensive continued, and the Imperial Remnant was reduced down to a mere 8 sectors with 8 Moths left. I forget how large the galaxy is. I think it's like 1,000 sectors or something. It's something huge. Like, if we just look at this... no, that's not the wrong one. If we look at this, yeah, like, sectors are not very large. And the Empire only controlled a couple up here. They only had, I think, like, a couple dozen Star Destroyers left. The entire thing, like I said, was a complete and total disaster. After the war, the New Republic refused to let up and would keep taking Imperial system after Imperial system. The whole thing, like I said, was a disaster. Pelion assumed basically military dictatorship, formed a military dictatorship at this point. Ironically, had he not tried to stick within the Empire's constitution and just formed a junta earlier on, this disaster might not have happened. So this is from the Second Galactic Civil War, but that roughly is the size of what uh, Pelion's territory was, minus actually Orinda. They retook that, then the Yuzon Vaughn War. So I guess kind of above there is all they had left after the final Imperial push. And so we head into the last little bit of our history of the Imperial Civil War, the Comossi Document Crisis, which was a final attempt by hardliners to try to reverse the situation. Around this time period, the Empire had tried to develop kind of a bizarre super weapon called the Combat Predictor. So the idea was the thing with cloaking devices in Star Wars is it also prevents you from seeing outward. So it will cloak you from the outside world, but it'll cloak the outside world from you, which is kind of the downside. So what their goal was going to be was they're going to use a computer to take data on like trajectory and stuff, then activate the cloaking system and use the computer to guide their fire. This, of course, didn't work at all and was a complete disaster. So Pelion's like, look, guys, it's finished. We're done. We need to discuss our surrender. So he went on a campaign to try to get all the Moffs to agree to it. However, meanwhile, a group of hardliners, which I think is kind of similar to the coup that happened at the end of the Soviet Union, in which the hardliners tried to remove Gorbachev. So Moff Dizra, along with a clone of an Imperial Guard who also had some of Thrawn's DNA. I don't know, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And Flim, who was a con man, got together and launched a triumvirate. Their plan being to reverse the whole situation and defeat the New Republic. So their 4D chess plan started out with planting a incomplete copy of the Comossi document on Wayland, which had been the secret storehouse where Thrawn had deposited where Thrawn had found the cloning cylinders and a bunch of other stuff. Now, the thing to keep in mind is the end of the Galactic Civil War was written by Timothy Zahn, who also wrote the Thrawn trilogy. So there's a lot of allusions to it. Mara Jade is a main character, etc., etc. So what happened with the Comossi Document Crisis was early in the Empire's reign. For whatever reason, they decided to destroy the planet Kamos. Now, the Comossi are known for being the most benevolent, kind-hearted race in the galaxy. I think Comossi means friend from afar or something in a number of languages because they're considered to be such a nice people. Basically, they were universally beloved, but the Empire blew their planet up, which made a bunch of people really sad. What the Comossi document revealed, the incomplete copy, was that the Bothans had, in cooperation with the Galactic Empire, sabotaged Kamos's planetary shield. So the Bothans were directly complicit in the genocide of the Comossi people. So the New Republic Senate immediately demanded that the Bothan government pay for a new planet for the Comossi. The Bothans were bankrupt and they couldn't pay. And because the Bothans were such an unpleasant people who had scammed a lot of the rest of the galaxy and were involved in all kinds of shady stuff, a lot of the New Republic worlds saw this as an opportunity to dogpile on them. As basically the New Republic broke down, lots of other governments saw this as an opportunity to settle more old scores, and skirmishes began to spring up all over the place. It was then the New Republic realized that most of the Galactic Empire's forces had not been fighting the New Republic, but had been occupying various planets and preventing internal wars. So internal wars were going crazy. A number of species, however, sided with the Bothans, including the Mon Calamari, who, as you know, have a truly huge fleet. And so just the whole thing just started to get crazier and crazier and crazier. So this was all part of Moff Dizra and the cloned Imperial Guardsmen's 4D chess plan. So they recruited Flynn, who is a con man, and who had learned to copy all of Grand Admiral Thrawn's gestures, his voice, his method of speaking, etc. So he got implants in his eyes so they glowed red. He had his skin dyed blue, and he began to go and appear to various border worlds. So he would show up on border worlds and say, I have returned the Grand Admirals back, surrender and rejoin the Empire. So with the New Republic basically falling apart and the return of the legendary Thrawn, dozens of border worlds began to rejoin the Empire. Now, despite these planets rejoining, Pelion was like, it doesn't matter. 1,000 planets could rejoin. We're not going to be able to beat the New Republic. We just don't have the forces. It's nice that the New Republic is fighting each other, but there really isn't any, like, it doesn't really help us very much, to be perfectly honest. We don't have the forces to take advantage of it. Maybe if you hadn't squandered everything in the big push we had a couple of years ago, I could actually do something about it. But no, we're completely screwed. So Pelion was trying to get a copy of the Comossi document. Unfortunately, Moth Disra had deleted them from their systems. And around this time, something had leaked about the Hand of Thrawn. Was a document that had been mentioned within some of the stuff that they found on Wayland. So Pelion recalls that near the end of Thrawn's life, Thrawn said, if I fall, then victory resides in the Hand of Thrawn. So no one had any idea what that meant. Mara Jade and Luke go on an adventure into the unknown regions where they discover that the Hand of Thrawn is a giant fortress shaped like a hand. So the Empire of the Hand was what Thrawn had been doing in the unknown regions, combining the Chiss Ascendancy and Imperial technology. He had succeeded in conquering, I think it was something like 160 sectors. They had thousands of spaceships. They had built a truly massive state out there. Now, my guess would be it was very sparsely populated, but very technologically developed. As the Chiss are advanced, they don't have some of the things that the Empire has, because they've developed technology in a completely different fashion. But a lot of their stuff is still very impressive, and combining the two together had great results. So they find that, and Mara Jade and Luke go into the Hand of Thrawn, and they discover a unaltered copy of the Comossi document. So why they wanted to find the Comossi document was it had the names of the Bothans who had sabotaged the planetary shield. And if they could just bring them to justice and throw them to the mob, then people wouldn't be demanding the death of the entire Bothan species. So while all this stuff was happening in the main galaxy, so Mara Jade and Luke find out about the Empire of the Hand, how big it is. They also find that Thrawn has a nearly fully grown clone within the Empire of the Hand. Now, in a supremely lame fashion, the clone gets destroyed when a security bot shoots them and causes the whole chamber to flood. The idea being that Thrawn had left a clone behind, and he had uploaded his memories to a computer, so the clone would be genetically and mentally identical to him, and would be able to lead the Empire of the Hand with all its resources in a completely new campaign. With the clone's death and getting the Comossi document, Fleet Admiral Voss Park showed up, who was the steward that Thrawn had left behind to run things while he had been away. Mara and Luke said, look, Thrawn's clone is dead. That was our bad. But, like, it doesn't matter at this point. You can turn over the Empire of the Hand to Pelion. We can start another galactic civil war. It's not going to change anything. You guys have lost. Let's just give peace a chance. And Voss Park's like, okay, that sounds good to me. So they head back. So while they were off Scooby-Dooing the Comossi document, Pelion had managed to get the approval of the Moths to launch surrender negotiations. He didn't want to surrender to a politician, though, so he sent a message to the Republic's top admiral, other than Akbar, General Garmbel Iblis. His idea being that he would rather surrender to a military man that he respected. So his message gets intercepted, and he's waiting in a nebula where Moff Disra's forces attack him and try to make it look like it's Garmbel Iblis to try to get Pelion to continue the Galactic Civil War. However, Pelion has learned from his his hero Thrawn, and he's able to, studying their tactics, figure out that it's not Garm Bel Iblis, it's actually Imperials under the command of Moff Dizra, and that they've kind of been screwing around, and they intercepted his message. So a bunch of stuff happens. Leia winds up meeting with Pelion, where he proposes surrender. She had met up with a Kamasi, and she had her Nogari bodyguard. Upon meeting them, Pelion says in a sad voice, an Alderaanian, a Kamasi, and a Nogari, the three people with the most reason to hate the Empire. So he offers to negotiate basically a surrender. Leia says, I've stepped down as head of state for a while, so Gavrisum is in charge. You're going to have to negotiate with him, but I think something can happen. We can't negotiate, though, until the Kamasi document crisis is over. So you have, like I said, there's a Scooby-Doo thing where Pelion figures everything out. He goes back, he unmasks Moff Dizra as being behind the whole thing. He exposes that Thrawn is actually a con artist. The cloned Imperial Guardsman gives a megalomaniacal rant about how he will lead the Empire back to glory. He gets killed, and Pelion and Gavrisum meet, and they sign the treaty ending the Galactic Civil War. Here's a picture of the treaty being signed. Leia was also there. Also known as the Bastion Accord. So let's read the terms of the treaty. The treaty did not outline a surrender on either side, either of the Imperial Remnant or the New Republic. It instead put forth terms that would leave what remained of the Galactic Empire intact, but would end hostilities between the two rival parties. It additionally opened up the Imperial Remnant to trade and commerce with the New Republic, and put limitations on smuggling for both governments to enforce. In addition, government systems in either government group would be allowed to choose their alignment, satisfying Imperial loyal systems in New Republic space. The treaty also banned the use of cloaking devices. So that was the end of the Galactic Civil War, and the end of the Imperial Civil War. It ended with that treaty. Pelion had managed to get a better deal than he could have reasonably hoped for, due to, I guess, his willingness to compromise. The New Republic could have very easily just steamrolled what was left of the Empire or reduced them to a vassal state. However, he was able to sign a peace treaty without surrendering. Pelion would continue as the supreme commander of the Imperial Remnant for quite some time before going into retirement for one of many times. He would frequently be called back out. So that is kind of the end of the series, but we're going to talk a little bit about the aftermath and what would wind up happening in the future. So eventually the Yuuzhan Vong would show up, and they basically wiped the floor with the Galactic Republic. The Galactic Republic reformed itself into the Galactic Federation of Free Alliances, also known as the Federal Galactic Republic. I believe was its official name, which had been a successor to the New Republic. So the Empire was actually another one of the founding members of the Galactic Federation of Free Alliances after they had entered the Yuuzhan Vong War. The Yuuzhan Vong had launched a series of offensives against Imperial territory. In fact, once the Yuuzhan Vong provoked the Empire, it proved to be the turning point in the war, as Pelion entered the side of the then New Republic, which became the Galactic Federal Republic, and was given supreme command of the combined fleet. And he proceeded to wipe the floor with the Yuuzhan Vong. The Empire lost a couple battles, but they always dealt disproportionate damage. And probably the turning point of the entire war was the Battle of Boros, in which they succeeded in devastating the Yuuzhan Vong fleet. It was notable for Pelion winning it despite being in a Bacta tank at the time, and which he uttered probably the most awesomely cheesy line in the entire series. You may win the occasional battle against Zvorik, but the Empire will always strike back. So, eventually after that, Jagged Fel, who came from the Fel dynasty, or the House of Fel, which were a noble family under the Galactic Empire, Jagged Fell would go on to marry Jania Solo. So, and then they would have a series of children who would bear the name Fell, and it would be the House of Fell Solo. Since they were descended from the Skywalkers, all of the Fell children would be extremely powerful in the Force, etc. At some point in time, Jagged Fell became the head of the Imperial State, and through a referendum or whatever, declared himself emperor, ending something like a 20-year long interregnum. The Empire had actually been without an emperor longer than it had been at that point. So he declared himself Galactic Emperor of the Imperial Remnant, or I guess at this point the Fell Empire. The Fell Empire had a couple names, just the New Order. It was normally, I think, just called the Empire, but it was under the Fell Monarchy. Now, the Fell Monarchy followed the trend set out by Pelion, focusing on good governance, efficiency, providing for the needs of the people, etc. They ended a lot of... While they kept... It was still human-centric, they ended some of the xenophobia and allowed aliens to serve in the Stormtrooper Corps and the Imperial Navy. The Fell Empire created their own version of the Jedi, the Imperial Knights, who were lightsiders, but as opposed to kind of being like the Jedi, they were directly sworn to the Emperor, and they were trained with guns. They also carried blasters and used tanks and starfighters and stuff in addition to their lightsabers. The Fell Empire did not employ Darksiders, and the Imperial Knights took an oath to kill the Emperor should he fall to the dark side. All Fell Emperors were received the same training as Imperial Knights and served in the army for a certain duration of time. The Fell Empire referred to itself as the New Order with a human face after the communist thing in Eastern Europe. And they reduced censorship was lessened during this time period. There wasn't nearly as much secret police. The Fell Empire launched the Victory Without War campaign that established Imperial missions throughout the galaxy. The Imperial missions spread Imperial culture and provided charitable works and community projects and stuff to foster good relations for the Empire. So as the Fell Empire gradually peacefully expanded and eventually became the dominant power a couple hundred years after the events of the original trilogy. And like I said, it had built on Pelion's example. And you can really say Pelion was the founder of the Fell Empire. And he had created a government that would eventually become the dominant power in the galaxy again. When Pelion died, he was buried, and his gardens, because after he had retired, he took up gardening and had built this great garden. The Fell Emperors would go there to meditate, and it was a national park, I guess you could say. Eventually, the Fell Empire, under the leadership of Darth Krayt, would manage to retake the entire galaxy. Then Darth Krayt would get overthrown, and then it would merge with the Galactic Alliance. I don't know, a bunch of stuff happened, but needless to say, the Empire remained strong. They had a series of emperors again. Primogeniture had been established. Things were stable and things were good. So that brings us to the end of the Galactic Imperial Civil War and kind of the beyond. What can be said about it? I think it's a very interesting saga they managed to build. I'm sad that they got rid of it. Granted, the whole thing developed over time. There had to be a lot of retcons, especially as new material came out. But like I said, they issued the Essential Guide to Warfare and the Essential Atlas, which kind of harmonized things, and that was kind of the definitive canon as to what happened in the future and what kind of the galactic events were. I think, and someone was asking me, I guess, to kind of do a summary or an epilogue. So I'll do that after this, but that's the end of kind of the historical section. I hope you enjoyed the series. More to come. God bless.